What is post-traumatic stress disorder? It is a psychological and physiological response to extreme traumatic stress, oftentimes involving actual or threatened death, either being involved in or exposed to. In essence, when the body experiences that type of severe traumatic stress, it can in some instances overwhelm the mind and body's ability to cope with that type of stress. It kind of causes a breakdown in the individual's ability to essentially manage stress type symptoms. And so what it oftentimes causes is a person to experience a constant state of being stressed. So those stress functions of the mind and body are constantly activated. It's kind of like having your foot on the gas pedal all the time. As a result of that, it can cause increasingly severe symptoms, which are sort of the hallmark characteristic symptoms associated with post-traumatic stress disorder. Those are very common, and they include, amongst other things, intrusive thoughts, and so that can be anything from traumatic or disturbing nightmares. It can be unwanted thoughts that sort of pop up in response to sort of innocent or innocuous triggers. So you're walking down the street, you see a car that reminds you of some terrible traumatic incident you were involved in. It shouldn't trigger a traumatic response, but it does because you've associated that type of thing with the traumatic event. It can also involve things that are known as flashbacks, and that's actually a dissociative response where you feel as though the incident is actually happening again, and it can last for a few seconds up to several hours. That can be anything from briefly smelling the smells that you experienced at the time or hearing some of the sounds you experienced at the time. So those are some of the cardinal symptoms associated with post-traumatic stress disorder. In addition to that, there is also the avoidance symptom where in essence, you actively attempt to avoid thinking about or experiencing the memories associated with the traumatic event. And so that can be anything from having difficulty talking about the event or experiencing severe distress when you're discussing the event. It can also involve avoiding people, places, or things that are associated with the traumatic event. So, for example, in the context of law enforcement, hearing sirens may cause a sense of panic or a sense of upset. Seeing colleagues in their uniform, being reminded of that traumatic event. Seeing or trying to avoid crowds, for instance, or things of that sort. So it's avoiding people, places, things that are associated with the traumatic event. In addition to that, there is also the feelings or negative moods that are experienced as a result of post-traumatic stress disorder. That can include, particularly in law enforcement, a sense of foreshortened future. You feel like your number is going to be up. You can feel, in particular, guilt, shame associated with the traumatic event, thinking, had I done something differently, maybe the outcome would have been different, and feeling disassociated from family, friends, loved ones, no longer enjoying things you used to like to do, so negative moods. In addition to that, there's the cardinal, what we'll call a cardinal symptom associated with post-traumatic stress disorder, which is the hypervigilance or hyperarousal. And again, that's tied to being kind of in a constant state of stress. And that can include a heightened startle response. So you're a lot more jumpy. So you hear a sound or a loud noise, and it startles you much more than it normally should. It may be feelings of constantly being on edge. You feel like there's something bad going to happen around every corner. So with our law enforcement, we often hear them say they go into a room and they immediately scan to see if there's any danger in the area. People will report that they lock their doors 7 times at night before they go to bed, and we even occasionally have people that say, they sleep with a knife under their pillow. So those would be examples of that hypervigilance or hyperarousal. Can also include things like reckless or irrational behavior. That's not uncommon, unfortunately. Taking risk-taking behavior, so driving at excessive speeds. Oftentimes this can turn into a situation where there's alcohol abuse, run-ins with the law, things of that sort, risk-taking behavior. Can also involve a increased irritability. So a lot of times people will report I was blowing up at my family a lot. I was, getting really angry over small things. So it's sort of an increased stress response or a response, increased outbursts in response to relatively smaller stressors. So that's a very, very common symptom associated with post-traumatic stress disorder. In addition to that, difficulty concentrating. You can't keep focused because you're constantly on alert. Difficulty falling asleep, particularly because your mind's always racing. Difficulty staying asleep, and obviously if your sleep's already being interrupted by traumatic nightmares, it just compounds the issue. In essence, those symptoms, in order for typically associated with post-traumatic stress disorder, those symptoms ultimately become very distressing, or they ultimately become impairing from a social context, so they interfere with your social relationships. Perhaps they're causing a strain on your marriage or causing difficulty with your interactions with your kids, or they ultimately result in difficulty in performing your job duties. And in the context of law enforcement, that comes out where officers will start being concerned about their ability to safely and effectively carry out their duties as a result of these symptoms.